Hello, friends, and welcome back to another Invisible Man reading. Today I'm reading Chapter 20, Part 2. He made a fuss outside, which I disregarded, and after a time he went away. But this brought matters into a crisis. I did not know what he would do, nor even what he had the power to do. To move to fresh apartments would have meant delay. Altogether, I had barely £20 left in the world, for the most part in the bank, and I could not afford that. Vanish, it was irresistible. Then there would be an inquiry, the sackings of my room. At the thought of the possibility of my work being exposed or interrupted at its very climax, I became angry and active. I hurried out with the 3 books of notes, my checkbook, the tramp has them now, and directed them from the nearest post office to a house of call for letters and parcels in Great Portland Street. I tried to go out noiselessly. Coming in, I found my landlord going quietly upstairs. He had heard the door close, I suppose. You would have laughed to see him jump aside on the landing as I came tearing after him. He glanced at me as I went by him, and I made the house quiver with the slamming of my door. I heard him come shuffling up to my floor, hesitate, and go down. I set to work upon my preparations forthwith. I was all done with that evening and night. While I was still sitting under this sickly, drowsy influence of the drugs that decolorized blood, there came a there, there came a repeating knocking at the door. It ceased, footsteps went away and returned, and knocking was resumed. There was an attempt to push something under the door, a blue paper. Then, in a fit of irritation, I rose and went and flung the door wide open. "Now then," said I, "it was my landlord, with a notice of ejectment or something." He held it out to me, saw something odd about my hands. I I expected, and lifted his eyes to my face. For a moment he gaped, then he gave a short, irrecluded cry, dropped candle and wort together, and went blundering down the dark passage to the stairs. I shut the door, locked it, and went to the looking-glass. Then I understood his terror. My face was white, like white snow, like white stone. But it was all horrible. I had not expected this suffering. A night of racking anguish, sickness, and fainting. I set my I set my teeth through my I set my teeth through my skin, was presently afire, all my body afire. But I lay there like grim death. I understood now how it was the cat had howled until I chloroformed it. Luckily, it was I lived alone and un, untended in my room. There were times when I sobbed and groaned and talked, but I stuck to it. I became insensible and woke languid in the darkness. The pain had passed. I thought I was killing myself, and I did not care. I shall never forget that dawn, and the strange horror of seeing that my hands had become clouded glass, and watching them grow clearer and thinner as the day went by, until at last I could see disorder of my room through them. Though I closed my transparent eyelids, my limbs became glassy, and bone and ear arteries vanished, and the little white nerves went last. I ground my teeth and stayed there to the end. At last, only the dread tips of the fingernails remained, paled and white, and the brown stain of some acid upon my fingers. I struggled up. I struggled up at first. I was as incapable as a swathed infant, stepping stepping with limbs I could not see. I was weak and very hungry. I went and stared at nothing in the shaving glass, at nothing save where an attenuated pigment still remained behind the retina of my eyes, fainter than mist. I had to hang on to the table and press my forehead to the glass. It was only a frantic effort of will that I dragged myself back to the apparatus and completed the process. I slept during the forenoon, pulling the sheets over my eyes to shut out the light, and about midway I was awakened again by a knocking. My strength had returned. I sat up and listened and heard a whispering. I sprang to my feet and as noiselessly as possible began to detach the connections of my apparatus and to uh, dis- distribute it about the room so as to destroy the suggestions of its arrangement. Presently the knocking was renewed and voices called, my first landlord and then two others. To gain time I answered them. The invisible rag and pillow came to hand, and I opened the window and pitched them out on the crescent cover. As the window opened, a heavy crash came at the door. Someone had charged it with an idea of smashing the lock, but the stout bolts I had screwed up some days before stopped him and startled me, made me angry. I began to tremble and do things hurriedly. I tossed together some loose paper, straw, packing paper, and so forth in the middle of the room and turned on the gas. Heavy blows began to rain upon the door. I could not find the matches. I beat my hands on the wall with rage. I turned down the gas again, stepped out of the window on the crescent cover very softly, lowered the sash, and sat down, secure and invisible, but quivering with anger to watch events. They split a panel. I saw, and in another moment they had broken away the staples of the bolts. I had stood in the open doorway. It was the landlord and his two stepsons, sturdy young men of 3 or 4 and 20. Behind them fluttered the old hag of a woman from downstairs. You may imagine their astonishment on finding the room empty. One of the younger men rushed to the window at once, flung it flung it up and stared out his staring eyes and thick-lipped bearded face. Came a foot from my face. I was half minded to hit his silly counter uh, con- I was half minded to hit his silly countenance, but I rested my doubled fist, and he stared right through me. So did the others as they joined him. The old man went and peered under the bed, and they all made a rush for the cupboard. Then they had to argue about it at length in Yiddish and Cockney English. They concluded I had not answered them, that their imagination had deceived them. A feeling of extraordinary elation took the place of my anger as I sat outside the window and watched these four people from the old lady came for the old lady came in, glancing suspiciously about her like a cat, trying to understand the riddle of my behavior. The old man, so far as I could understand, pat- his patios agreed with the old lady that there was a vivisection. The sons protested in garbled English that I was an, an electrician and appealed to the dynamos and uh, radiators. They were all nervous again. My arrival, although I found subsequently that they had bolted the front door, the old lady peered into the cupboard and under the bed, and one of the young men pushed up the register and stared up the chimney. one of my fellow lodgers, a uh, costermonger who shared the opposite room with a butcher, appeared on the landing, and he was called in and told incoherent things. It occurred to me that the radiators, if they fell into the hands of some acute, well-educated person, would give me away too much. And watching my opportunity, I came into the room and tilted one of the little dynamos off its fellow on which it was standing, and smashed both apparatuses. Then, while they were trying to explain the smash, I dodged out of the room and went softly downstairs. I went to one of the sitting rooms and waited until they came down, still speculating and argumentative, all a little disappointed at finding no horrors, and all a little puzzled how they stood and regarded how and all puzzled how they stood with regard to me. Then I slipped up again with a box of matches, fired my heap of paper and rubbish, put the chairs and bedding fair by, led the gas to the affair in means of an India rubber tube, and waving a farewell to the room, left it for the last time. You fired the house?" exclaimed Kemp. "Fired the house. It was the only way to cover my trail, and no doubt it was insured. I slipped the bolts from the front door quietly, and went out into the street. I was invisible, and I was only just beginning to realize the extraordinary advantages of my invisibility gave me. My head was already teeming with plans of all the wild and wonderful things I had now impunity to do." And that's the end of chapter 20. So, friends, tune in tomorrow for chapter 21. And thank you for watching. Bye.